Good evening, everyone. I'm David Butler, and I'm delighted to welcome you all today to the third installment of our Spot Recruitment's On the Spot Leadership Series. As always, our fantastic host, Garrett Harte from Harte Media, and today he will be joined by two true marketing leaders, Margaret Molloy and Andrea Linehan. Margaret is the current Global Chief Marketing Officer of Siegel and Gale, a leading branding agency, and Margaret is also host to the hit podcast series, How CMOs Commit. Andrea is Global Chief Marketing Officer, similar to Margaret, a leader in the marketing field, and she is Global Chief Marketing Officer for CurrencyFair. Andrea was also listed as one of the top 30 influencing marketers of 2021. Killian, our Spot Recruitment's Director of Business Development, will join towards the end for a Q&A. I'll pass you over to Garrett now, and he will navigate the conversation. Thanks a million.
Thanks, David, and welcome to everyone on this glorious Irish summer day. It's an absolute pleasure to be the facilitator once again for this, the third On the Spot Leadership and Business webinar, and again to welcome Andrea and Margaret. When I was editor-in-chief at News Talk Radio, one of the pieces of advice I routinely gave to producers and researchers when they were putting a topic together was that the topic is only as strong and as memorable as the guests you have on talking about it. And having spoken to both Margaret and Andrea over the last few weeks, I can safely say we have two outstanding guests for today's fireside chat. And we will touch on each of their stories over the next 45 minutes or so. But what I would do is encourage everyone who's on the call, whether you're a young marketeer or a successful entrepreneur, to take some time to actually read both Margaret and Andrea's LinkedIn profiles to give you a sense of the story and the routes they have taken to the success they are today. Margaret and Andrea, thank you for your time today, joining us from Dublin and New York. Margaret, can I begin with you? And let's go back to the beginning. Growing up in Tubber County, Offaly, to becoming global CMO of Siegel and Gale in New York City. When you go back to those days, particularly at secondary school, Margaret, where did your love of business and marketing come from?
Thank you so much, Garrett. Lovely to be on. And what a treat to meet Andrea, a fellow Irish global marketeer, an absolute honor. I'll go through it briefly. Thank you for referring our guests to the LinkedIn profiles. I grew up in rural Ireland, the eldest of 6 children, on a farm. So maybe many of your audience can relate to that. And that's the context. But perhaps what's more interesting is the culture. And the culture, when I think back on it now as a marketer, I characterize with 3 Ps. The first P is potential. We all had that sense that we had tremendous potential and everyone had potential. And that was because of the possibilities. We were among the first generation. My parents didn't have the opportunity to complete secondary education. So we were among the first generation to have access to college. And that created a tremendous sense of possibility. And certainly growing up, it came also with another P, a word that's popular now, but that's not new to me, and that's privilege. We really understood, our generation, certainly in my home, that we had a privilege to have access to education and exposure that our previous generation did not. So if you put all these P's together, possibilities, potential, and privilege, I believe that was quite formative in my career, and I carry that with me. In terms of the US, I have an interesting relationship with the United States. And I didn't share this with you, but I think it's relevant. The aunt of my father, my grand aunt, she boarded the Titanic. never to make it to the US. And on a personal level, I had that strange tension with America. On the one hand, it was alluring, and on the other, it was potential unfulfilled. So always in the back of my head, the States had a certain charm. In terms of the business component, as a young kid, I devoured the ads at the back of the newspapers regarding jobs. I know the gentlemen on the call are in the recruiting realm. I don't know even if that's still a thing, the ads at the back of the papers. But really, as a kid, I did intuitively what the experts like you on the call today would call skills mapping. I looked at my skills and somewhat strategically mapped them to what I saw in the ads. And guess what? I landed on marketing. And here we are.
And when you go back to those early days, Margaret, were there key influences and influencers that you would point to say, yeah, when I look back, he or she or that period were clear drivers to where you are today?
Well, I mentioned the lady whom I never met, Aunt Bridget. That certainly was an influence. In terms of mentors, for me, it's always been educators, my teachers. Those were the individuals in the community who had education, and that inspired me. And Mrs. Sheehan prepared me for Scorn and Oak. I was one of those kids who did the recitations in Scorn and Oak. Now, mind you, I couldn't do any dance or music. Again, back to skills mapping and knowing my limitations. Later in my career, it continued to be educators. I was fortunate to gain admission to the Harvard Business School, and I was very inspired by Dean Nita Nourier. His class was called Leadership. Now, a lot of my peers thought that was a sort of soft class relative to finance and some of the other disciplines. But for me, that was core, understanding, frankly, how to influence others, to appreciate incentives. That stands to me today in my leadership role, but also as a marketer. So for me, influence, mentorship, fundamentally, it's around teachers. And I would say today, I've expanded that interpretation. I don't have an individual sponsor or mentor, but I do have what I would characterize as a board of directors. Many colleagues that I look to for counsel, for feedback, and a little bit of criticism, constructive criticism when I need it as well.
Andrea, we'll move on to yourself. And again, you're very welcome and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Take us back to those early years in your own life, and was that entrepreneurial spirit evident from your school days?
But first I have to say, again, Margaret, I've been a bit of a fangirl, and I've got a lot of communications from a lot of people saying, I can't believe you're on a webinar with Margaret. So I have to put that out there, you know, because it is a real privilege. But different, when I listened to Margaret and how pragmatic and organized she was so early on, I was not that way. I grew up in Limerick. My primary school, secondary school, and university were all within a 500-meter radius of my house. So for me, when I graduated, it was like, right, get me out of Limerick isn't enough. Get me off the island and get me somewhere as exotic as possible. And I'm not even coming from a marketing background. I did finance and accounting as my undergrad. And I found myself over in the Middle East, and I was just, I'll try anything and everything. Just give it to me and I'll try it. And I just fell into marketing, and I just found that I actually had a bit of a knack for it and tried it. And for a lot of my career, I haven't had a marketing senior ahead of me to learn from. So it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of learning the slow and the hard way. I did have a stint where I did have someone very talented that I was reporting to for about 6 months to a year, and I learned a ton. But for the rest of it, it has been kind of finding my way in the dark. And look, there's pros and cons to that. But it's so interesting, even learning Margaret's story. And we've certainly come from very different tracks to end up in somewhere similar-ish.
And again, Andrea, the role of mentors and influencers in your early days. Can you point out or refer back and say that was a really important time, or when you reflect on it, that's certainly that person you engaged with was an influence in your decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. And it happened by accident when I moved to the Middle East. I actually went over there with Arinta originally on a management training program with their Bahrain duty free, and so gearing me up to be a general manager of one of their global duty frees. I ended up relocating to Oman and fell into sales and marketing there. And I just happened to, I didn't know the person was going to be a mentor, but I met somebody in sales and marketing, a man named Ahmed Zabra, who is now a very close friend of mine, Lebanese, and somebody who has a long history in marketing. And he decided to take me under his wing, and I resisted for a long time because, you know, I was young and cocky, and I thought, you know, I knew exactly where I was going, what I was doing. But he persisted, and I was very fortunate. I was a young girl who had gone over to the Middle East, and you know, at the end of the day, I became a woman in the Middle East, both professionally and personally. And I was very fortunate to have someone like that who guided me on all fronts. And I have to say, I'm not sure I would have really invested in my future in marketing in particular if I hadn't had his guidance. But it was by accident. I'd love to say that I was so pragmatic that I went out to search for a coach and mentor, and I thought this was the smartest thing. I fought it all the way, and I was just fortunate that this person was like, no, I see your potential and you're going to like it or lump it, and I'm going to drag you along. And when I started to see the benefits come out of this person's guidance and mentorship, I then got really engaged in it, and I have been obsessed with that since. And I put a lot of time and effort into finding broader direct and indirect mentors, but I make an even bigger and better effort to make sure that I'm doing that for my own team and anybody that I come across. I'm like obsessed with knowledge transfer and experience transfer. And if I can save anybody, you know, 5 years from learning mistakes and just give them a bit of a heads up, I am all over it like a rash.
So I want to move into a different area now for a few minutes and talk about the leadership roles that a CMO plays in an organization. And one example or one anecdote, just to be a little bit provocative here, or to get it moving up a gear, is having spent 20 years working in a creative industry, I was always struck by the constant battle between the chief marketing officer and the financial controller, and really, in short, that the CFO could never fully understand why we're spending on marketing and the return on marketing. And Margaret, when I read your bio, you describe yourself as a simplifier, which I love the description, but also a business-minded marketeer. Do you have to be a business-minded marketeer to succeed?
I believe you do. I think I appreciate your provocation. It's interesting. There are many directions we could go with that one. I'll keep it safe and say that everyone has a functional expertise, let's assume. And that's extraordinarily helpful to have that vocabulary, that vernacular, that shorthand when you're talking to colleagues who share that. But when you leave your function, let's say marketing, we need a common language that we can all have a constructive conversation around. And that for me is anchoring it in business. So I have lots of jargon and many marketing acronyms. Andrea and I could have great fun on this. But when we leave our marketing universe and we enter the world of our peers, then it's important to default to what's the business outcome we're all trying to achieve. I mean, really, when you think about it, at its heart, marketing is about persuading people to act. Companies, their purpose, I would offer, is to solve problems for people and the planet profitably. Awfully simple definition. So that lends itself to being sure that you can speak in plain English and in a language your colleagues can understand. And that's worked for me quite well in collaboration with chief financial officers.
And Andrea, your own views on that, and when it comes to driving high performance in business, the role that the CMO plays and the factors that are required.
I'm very fortunate. My undergrad is in finance and accounting, and I'm a chartered management accountant. So I come from that field, and I am guilty. I'm so guilty in college. The marketing people were the fluffy people. They weren't really doing anything that was super complex. I'm so guilty of that. It was only when I actually moved into it as a profession that I just talk about eye-opener. It is not only incredibly complex, but the creativity and the left brain, right brain that's required to actually be a successful marketeer is unbelievably impressive. And I can say this as an outsider that has come inside to marketing. And I definitely, very early on, I realized the importance of bridging that gap. And I absolutely agree with Margaret. You know, there's a lot of the vernacular that goes into it that's I think lost along the way, and there's a lot of fear as well that happens between marketing and finance, and there's more of a concentration on marketeers' fears of finance, but finance fear marketing as well, because we are a gray area, you know, and I think that it's our onus for the likes of me and Margaret at a leadership level to help bridge that gap the whole way down. And I do it, like I say to my own team, you know, when we're dealing with other stakeholders in our business, you know, put your marketer hat on, think about personas. You know, what does the finance team need to know and understand? And if we were to market our efforts to them, how would we go about that? And that's probably the secret sauce we have as marketers, is that if we actually think about that internally and not just about externally as customers, we can help bridge that gap. But I've definitely found, as I've gone up the ladder myself, I present and put myself forward, and so I think it's really important across the board for any C-level position that, you know, we are business leaders first, and we just happen to be bringing our discipline of marketing, product engineering, finance to the table as our discipline of expertise. But we are a team of business leaders looking to build commercial, economic, intrinsic, extrinsic value, all of that lovely stuff. And I think that's the really important part. And too often I think marketing, because it's not, people don't focus in on the economic and the commercial value out of it as closely as a finance function or other functions. We have to fight a little bit harder just to really lay it down what it is that we're bringing. But that's where we are. We're Margaret and I are business leaders first, but we just happen to be bringing marketing expertise to the table.
Margaret, as we hopefully are entering into a new phase post the pandemic, you know, the whole world of brand building and pivoting brands and marketing perspective all come to play again. What's your sense of what the immediate future looks like from a business point of view as a leader in terms of the economic outlook, and also the opportunities for the CMOs and for brand builders?
I'm very optimistic. I think we are currently in very much a transition year, and that in and of itself creates an opportunity. I would counsel people to not look at this COVID pandemic period as a pause, meaning an interruption just to return to life before, rather as a portal. What can we move into? How can we transition our staff, our organizational model, our business purpose to unleash everyone's potential, as I discussed before, to unleash innovation, to capture the sense of we're all in this together that was so ever present during the past year and a half or so. I also think we've experienced a variety of crises globally. We've had, of course, the health crisis created by the pandemic and ensuing economic crises, but also particularly in the US, but not limited to the States, a reckoning with racial equity and equality more broadly defined. And that too gives me optimism because we've embraced a perspective of vulnerability where we're willing to have conversations in the boardroom that perhaps weren't deemed business conversations in the past. We're also entering a period where all of us as individuals are questioning our purpose and our relationship with work. So lots of change going on as we talk about hybrid and how we integrate work into our lives. Most fundamentally, from a business standpoint, I think the shift is from what previously was characterized as an obsession with customers and shareholder value. That's what we learned in school. When Andrea and I were in school, that was it. It was the Milton Friedman doctrine of it's all about shareholder value, and an evolution of that is customer obsession. Now we're entering a period where people are thinking much more about stakeholder capitalism. How does a business service its employees, the community at large, regulators, investors, consumers, all together? And that adds complexity. It adds challenge, but it adds the opportunity for business to have a much greater impact on society. And in that sense, I think it's an extraordinarily exciting time to be a marketer, to have a seat at that table, because brands can change the world. And we as marketers are steering that ship. So tremendous time for colleagues who are in your audience who are considering building their careers in business and in marketing in particular.
Andrea, for you, what issues arose during the pandemic from a marketing perspective, and what can we capitalize on as business and thought leaders?
I've always found it incredibly interesting how marketers at all levels, and I've seen it at very senior levels, forget that who we're talking to are people just like us. And we build out all of these personas, and we build out all of these things, but we still manage to disconnect ourselves and still happen to question people as if their behavior is somewhat slightly different to how we behave as people. And I keep saying to my team, bring it back, guys. Let's go down to the fundamentals. How are you behaving in COVID? Like, what are the emotions, or what are the thoughts, whether they're intellectual or emotive, that are going through your mind? Our customers are feeling the exact same thing. So let's not forget and pull away from that. And I don't want to get really, get into the human to human thing, but it's the reality of what it is. It is all human to human, whether it's B2C or B2B. And it doesn't matter whether it's pandemic or not. These are the realities of what's going on. And I'm loving what's coming out of all of this, that there is much more of the empathy thread is much more appreciated now, whereas before it was a little bit of that's a nice to have. But I think now that the fundamentals around empathy, like true deep empathy, not just your high level persona marketing stuff, but real true empathy is what's coming through now. And brands, for instance, were being pulled up very, very quickly if we're not being authentic. And like I've obviously been following Margaret and the amazing work around everything that's Pride. And I'll be frank, like my team said to me, oh, what are we going to do for Pride? I said, guys, we're not going to just, dicky up our logo and just put it out there. Like, what are we doing every other day of the year, every other month of the year? I was like, we got to stop ponying on the back of all of these initiatives and if we're going to be authentic and empathetic, we got to be the whole way. And it's not just what's out there front facing and what we need to be seen to be doing. It's like, what are we actually doing inside and internally every single day? So I said, no, we are. And that is, like, I see what Margaret's doing. The initiative across her and her company is depthful, like it's the whole way through. So they can stand behind everything that they do, everything they talk about when it comes to, for instance, Pride. We can't do that in our current company because we can't follow through right down to like really intrinsic levels. And I think that's a big thing that's just been cut raw throughout the pandemic. Brands are being pulled apart, and like, you know, surface level stuff is not appreciated anymore. You got to prove you're going deep into these matters. And that's, you know, as much devastation has happened throughout this epidemic, there's been a lot of positive things that have come out of it. And for me, as a brand owner, and that's one of the things that really stood out for me.
Margaret, Andrea touched on it. I want to pick it up on the future of branding roundtable that you hosted at the end of June, and the marketing leaders from the LGBTQ plus community. And I sat in on your webinar, and I was in awe. It was amazing and so powerful. And there was a leader, Rachel Typograph, pronounce her surname, who said that company Big Mac that she worked at, that people wanted to work for that company and work for a gay leader. I found it a really powerful statement. Maybe for the audience today, just to talk about that future of branding roundtable and the work that you have done with Pride.
Well, thank you for the question. And first, I just have to acknowledge what Andrea said. You know, being authentic, I look at maybe Seth Godin's definition of being authentic. It's being the same whether people are looking at you or not. And I really want to double click on Andrea's point, because it's not looking at you superficially. It's looking at you in a really deep and meaningful way. In terms of the Pride conversation, I invite your audience. You can hear it all on How CMOs Commit podcast. I'm in marketing, so had to give the plug. But it's a rich discussion. And it's one of a series we've been doing around different people, including different people in a conversation to understand how brands can be authentic. And fundamentally, the learning is exactly what Andrea said, intuitively, that you can't just what I call rainbow washing. You can't just change your logo if you're not making meaningful actions for the community that you're serving. And it begins with your internal employees. And that is true of LGBTQ, it's true of women, it's true of gender, it's true of racial equity. All of these issues you have to follow through. It's also true that at brands, representation really matters. So the marketing that we create, the stories, the commercials, the other manifestations of brand that we put in the market can make a huge difference, because representation can spark conversation, change perceptions, and ultimately help society move from stereotypes to real understanding. But in order to do that, we must represent everyone expansively and celebrate their experience holistically. So that was an important learning for me from these webinars, really thinking about inclusion not as a marketing artifact, but an operating principle, as Andrea so well said, in the day-to-day operations of your company and your brand. And I also think everyone's on a different stage in your journey. So my meta comment is, it's about being intentional and getting started on the journey. The community can discern, be it the LGBTQ community, allies, or others. The community can discern if you're being authentic. And if you stumble a little bit on the way, there's tolerance for that. If you continue on the journey as a human with a kind heart and as a brand with really honorable intentions.
And when I sat in on that webinar, the discussion was around diversity, inclusion, recruitment. And David and Killian and Spot Recruitment, you know, it's obviously a very interesting component. Talk about that in terms of the value to a company's identity.
There is no doubt in my mind, and I think in most people's minds right now, that diversity is essential. Not just because it's morally the right thing to do, but because it brings, back to Andrea's language, business benefit. unleashing creativity, many voices, cognitive diversity. People who've had different lived experiences lend themselves to better business decisions, better outcomes. It's also clear that consumers are demanding it. Your buyers are demanding that your organization, population, is representative of the market you're serving. So lots of commercial imperatives to embrace inclusion very holistically. I will say though, a watch out that I've observed is people using the term diversity, equity, and inclusion, throwing the language around without a lot of precision around what it means. And I draw on the work of some of the great experts like Frances Frye at Harvard. And one of her insights is that you must start with inclusion, not just diversity. So it's not enough to hire people from different populations and assume it'll all work out. You must create an inclusive culture first. And inclusion has two really important dimensions. The first dimension is that you feel welcome and safe despite any differences, LGBTQ, gender, race. Second aspect, higher order inclusion, if you will, is when an employee feels welcome because of their differences. That's really when success happens, that people are not looking for that amorphous cultural fit, but a cultural add, and where everyone is appreciated because of the difference. That's where the magic happens. Begins with everyone's welcome despite difference, but then because. And the secret I've found over the years is awfully simple. It's about getting curious about people's differences, asking questions with a really open heart to learn from others.
Excellent. Andrea, when we look at hiring and the components to hiring at executive level, what are the key criteria that you consider, and has the criteria altered over time, Andrea?
First, I'm going to absolutely echo everything that Margaret said, and I think we have a number of levels to go through. And the pertinent point for me, what Margaret said there, was around the value system, because I think what we do wrong as companies is we set these values around our culture, and then we look for people to fit within that. So it is absolutely phenomenal and fabulous that we're looking for diversity in terms of gender, sexual orientation, nationality, all of these things, right? So, but that's all for one piece of it. The second piece of it, though, is the value system, because there is not true diversity in any of your levels if all of these people with all of these different backgrounds are all carrying the exact same set of values. Then that's not actual true high level Maslow's hierarchy up there, true diversity in what's happening in our world. Now, I feel that we've such an amount of work still to do in terms of all the diversity when it comes to gender and sexual orientation. I think we've so much still to do there. But like I get, asked a lot, is it not fantastic to see that there's 30% women representative at boards? I'm like, I don't really care that 3 out of 10 people on the board have a pair of boobs. Like that doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is who on there reflects the values that I want to be able to not just emulate, but if they're my true values, I want to know that with my value set, I can make it to board level and not have to sacrifice any of my value system to get there. And I think that's the next generation of diversity in my mind. So, when I think about hiring people, I'm always, regardless of any of my team that are doing who are the ultimate hiring managers, I usually come in at the end in a bit of a culture check. But I'm not just looking at it as here are our lovely golden values that CurrencyFair have. Does this person like shoehorn into it? I'm actually really interested in their wider views and things that are a little bit out of the box. That for me is way more exciting. And they're the things I'm looking out for. But I honestly feel like we're another 5-10 years away before that becomes the broader conversation that we're all thinking about from a hiring perspective.
Yeah, and another point, Andrea, you might give a view on. Margaret touched on it earlier, on the value of marketing, that marketing can change the world, and certainly for younger generation, for inclusion, like the role that marketing can play, certainly in the digital space. Do you see that as a purpose that marketing needs to play more of?
I think it's already playing that role. Like for me, all things digital is just another format of distribution and engagement. It's, you know, and there'll be something more again beyond this. And Margaret and I know well, the fundamentals of marketing hasn't changed in decades and decades, and it won't continue. What keeps changing is data, the technologies around distribution, technologies around engagement. They're the things that keep changing. And, you know, I find it interesting that there's a much more of a push towards, we want, a lot of people who are very heavy on data analytics and data science to be heading up our marketing teams. And that's a trend at the moment, but the fundamentals of marketing won't ever go away. And I think this is one of the most important things to remember when we're hiring, that we're not going after the glitz and the glam of what's really sexy right now, but we're just thinking about who really understands the ABCs, because that's what builds true brands, regardless of what's happening around technology or capabilities or data.
Okay, Margaret, back to yourself, and we have about less than 10 minutes to go, and I'm going to get Killian to come in towards the end. I want to talk a little bit about the future of brands and the future opportunities. What do you see as the opportunities for brands as we look to the future of work, for example?
Tremendous future. I think brands, as I said previously, have the ability to change society in so many ways. Frankly, a lot of the research supports this. If you look at the work around trust, for example, people have more trust in business and brands than they have in many other institutions across the world, be it government or even religion. And for some people, brands are as important to them as religion. So that opportunity comes with responsibility. And brands have a responsibility to create and help create a society that is more equitable and more resilient. So from a recruiting standpoint and future work standpoint, it touches on a lot of what Andrea said about hiring colleagues. From a skill set, I look at very fundamental things, and I've doubled down on my emphasis on these. Number one, curiosity. I want to hire colleagues who can ask great questions and listen for the answers. Because although the platforms and the tools will change, the fundamental capacity to be curious is what will get you through that and create resilience. And that's a comment about colleagues, but it's also a comment about brands. Brands need to be curious about their consumers. Another skill that is underappreciated, but that I elevate, is writing. You talk about the future of work in an environment where many of us will be hybrid. Communications come into sharp relief, and the ability to write a clear brief that is succinct is outstanding. It is paramount, and frankly, it is rare. So I would encourage colleagues who are interested in careers in marketing to get the fundamentals right. And of course, if you put curiosity with writing, you often land on very good storytelling. And so much of what we do in marketing, be it through words or numbers or pictures, is in fact storytelling. If you can't write and if you don't have curiosity, you're really constrained as a colleague and as a future marketing executive.
Excellent. Andrea, to you, the opportunities you see for brands and maybe some advice such as Margaret has thrown out there for the young marketeer in terms of curiosity and the ability to write that perfect brief. We all strive for that, Margaret. Andrea, what's your thoughts?
As you can see, I'm smiling widely because I've seen it the same. Margaret is spot on with what she's saying. I'm even going to go back, and this is with the recruitment thread on, and for people who are interested in going for roles in marketing, whether they're in that sphere or not. We have a real power as marketers. We understand how to sell and market, and it really surprises me how many marketers at all levels of seniority forget when they're applying for a job to apply the fundamentals of marketing, which is, SEO. Look at a job description and how relevant is your CV to that job description. I'm hiring, and I'll be completely frank here, I'm hiring for a head of product marketing at the moment. I have been shocked at the level of people coming to me, and the word product marketing hasn't even existed it doesn't even exist on their CV. Like, these are really, really basic, simple things. And I think as marketers, too often we forget to apply it to ourselves and how we are marketing ourselves and building our brand. So from a recruitment perspective, I would say to people, start there, apply your marketing abilities to your own job searching and job hunting approach. Second thing, and to echo what Margaret said, for me, aptitude and attitude is the big thing. I love to see people coming in left of field from different disciplines wanting to get into marketing. If they have the aptitude and the attitude to want to learn, I'm all over them, and I will get into hyper knowledge transfer format. And I think it's really important. And look, as someone who came from finance and moved into marketing, I'm a big supporter of anybody who feels like they want to make that transition. I don't think it happens enough in marketing. Margaret probably can attest to this. You might get some, like close to home, like maybe people in sales or product or maybe customer service that might come over, but otherwise most of the disciplines just don't feel like it's a bridge too far. And I actually think we're losing out in marketing by not having people from these other on the discipline track come in and supplement the overall marketing talent pool, because we cross everything. Marketing crosses absolutely everything, and we need the talent to reflect that.
Thanks, folks. So I'm under strict orders to not go over time, and certainly I could talk to both of you for another couple of hours. And it's been an absolute pleasure from my point of view to have facilitated this conversation, a fireside chat. And on that note, I'm going to hand you over to Killian, who's going to ask a couple of questions that come through and do the final wrap up.
Thanks very much, Garrett. Yeah, a couple of questions have come in. I'm just going to put one to Andrea and Margaret in a moment. I just want to acknowledge the point about authenticity and following through. I think that's something that all our attendees will be able to relate to. I see names that I recognize from education, people working in universities and schools, people stations, and I think that ability to take meaningful action and what you do when nobody is looking is something that relates to all those fields. And this question might even tie in. Just a question came in about hopefully as the pandemic draws to a close or the vaccine rollout gets us out the other side, what measures do you think in a world now of remote work and blended work, what measures can large organizations take in a meaningful way to kind of keep that sense of belonging and that culture? We all saw the packs being sent out from employers and the pizza making at home and the kind of team building exercises that every organization was doing. But beyond those actions, what do you think companies can do to really foster that family sense and that team environment if there is going to be a world of remote work and blended work?
Do you mind, Margaret, if I say a piece on this? Because first, for me, that culture of you need to be seen, I think this is the big piece that we're really going to have to get over, is that if you are turning up at the office, that you're seen to be more committed. And this goes back to the old days of, if you're working until midnight, you're more committed. And I actually think that this is going to be the biggest detriment to us really introducing hybrid and remote working in a meaningful way, is if people feel under pressure that if they're not physically seen in the office, that it's going to hamper their progression in some way. And this has to be a top-down approach. And this has have to be effort from us as leaders to give as much time and attention to those people who are at home as the ones that are actually in the office. I actually feel like that's going to be the biggest hurdle. And I think people who want to be remote or hybrid are going to feel that pressure to come in if we don't change that culture from a leadership perspective.
I think that's spot on. I mean, recent research from Harvard Business School, Sadal Neely, says that 81% of people surveyed want a hybrid context. So companies are going to have to involve employees and really think about transition. I would build on what Andrea said. I think, look, culture, what is culture? It's about a company's beliefs and behaviors. And how do you affect that? You affect that by looking at your processes. So companies are going to have to audit their processes. A number of areas spring to mind. Number one is, what are our meeting norms? How do we make sure that the colleagues in the office and the colleagues dialing in remotely are contributing and feeling belonging in meetings? What are our communications norms? There's been a proliferation of channels. We have email, we have Slack, IM, myriad more. How do we make sure we have clarity on when to use which channel? And you must be tremendously intentional about all of this to achieve the productivity norms and to avoid the risk that Andrea puts out, which is essentially proximity bias, that you think the people who are close to you, or visibility bias, the people that you see automatically become the people you reward for performance. Ultimately, I would counsel companies to build that muscle of reflection. Reflect. What have we learned during this period? What rituals do we need to take with us into a hybrid context? What rituals do we need to sunset? And if you build that muscle to reflect, it'll serve you well in every evolution of a company culture and company work norms.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Margaret and Andrea. I think really comprehensive answers, and I'm glad from a spot recruitment perspective, our marketing team are online here and are taking notes, I'm sure. So really delighted, and I'll hand you back to David there now to close, but great stuff.
Yeah, look, thanks. And just to echo Killian's comments about comprehensive answers, I think all the attendees here were quite glued to the conversation as much as I have been. And I think it's fair to say that if our leaders are as thoughtful as both Margaret and Andrea in terms of applying values and authenticity, we're all in good hands in a business perspective. Look, I just want to extend my sincere thanks to both Margaret and Andrea for today, and also to Garrett for the steady hand as always. Thanks a million, and to, of course, our attendees as well. So thanks a million.
Guys.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Margaret. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Andrea. Bye-bye.
Pleasure. Lovely to meet you, Andrea.
You too, Margaret.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Ooh.